I wanted to share kind of a lesson that I've learned about making rash decisions. And I know that my beard here and my hair is all messed up, but nobody watches these videos anyway. But the lesson I want to share is just about making rash decisions and kind of the consequences of that, as opposed to taking things in an approached manner, planned out and executing based on a plan, and how God, I feel like, this is just my opinion, God blesses, having a plan and kind of moving on that, and that if you're doing something according to his plan, that you're putting it before him, that he would bless it. But if you're just doing something out of your own selfish will, it's not that he can't bless it, but he's less likely to, because you're not putting that thing before him. So it's like anytime we hold on to something and make a decision just based on our own humanness, we're not putting that before God. So why would God even bless that? Or not that he, again, won't, but putting it before, not actually praying about something and putting it before him, but just doing something. I just feel like, why would he bless it if you're not giving it to him, right? So let me kind of explain what I'm talking about. So a couple of years ago, I used to work as a satellite technician, and I installed dishes and I repaired dishes, and set up those, satellite TV systems. And the job got very frustrating, very, there was just a lot of stuff going on. And we actually got bought out by another company. Won't say who it was before or after, but after we got bought out, it just kind of went downhill. And so, we worked at this, and before, it was actually really good. It was probably the best job I ever had before we got bought out. But as soon as we got bought out, it just kind of it went downhill. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And the attitude of a lot of people there at that work was negative. So it was very negative environment to continuously be subjected to other, tax and just the company overall, and some of the changes they made with pay and benefits and how we worked, how we actually went about the work, and just a lot of changes that were just not great. They weren't in our best interest. It was all about the bottom line for this company. So anyway, a lot of changes were made. It wasn't a good environment. And at the time, it was starting to affect my depression. So at the time, I didn't really think that I had depression or no. So I kind of ignored that, right? I just thought you had to have a good attitude about it. But, it started to affect me. And I got to the point where I didn't even want to go to work. I was just, super frustrated, super angry, stuff like that. And so at that time, I was also kind of listening to these motivational speakers who tell you, you're greater than your circumstance, and, you should be out doing great things. Should be basically making your mark on the world and all this other stuff. And I'm not saying that stuff is necessarily wrong, but I was very heavily influenced in that, and that kind of played into how I was feeling at work, that I was better than the job I was working. And so I started getting these ideas that, I'm just going to leave this place and I'm going to go start my own business. I was going to start a consulting business for marketing. So I was going to do digital marketing for companies. And so, it kind of came to a boiling point with all these things at work, where one day, right after Christmas, I remember it was like the day I went back to work after Christmas was over. So I had like Christmas off on the day after that, but I think it was like the 27th of 2016. When I went to work that day, I just knew that was going to be the last job, the last day that I worked at that job. And I didn't plan it out. I didn't plan ahead of time, and I didn't tell my wife that I was going to be quitting. I just decided it that day. And, if you've never seen any videos about me or know my story, I have multiple kids, like multiple kids. And and my wife has diabetes. So, she requires having insurance to pay for a lot of the supplies. And so, that day I just decided I was going to quit. And so I did all my jobs, and then I met my wife at her job and told her, I'm not going back. And I'm sure you can imagine how well she took that, considering we had not talked to hadn't even talked about me quitting. I told her, she knew how bad it was, but I didn't tell her I was just going to quit until that day when I did. So we drove back to the shop. I turned in all my tools in my van, and that was it. I just didn't go back. And it didn't work out very well. Here I was in my head thinking that I was better than having a job. And I, tried to start this business. Well, I didn't have any leads. I didn't have any connections. I didn't have anything in place. I just decided I was just going to start doing it. And maxed out some credit cards, because I was trying to get this business going. I made a bunch of cold calls and, tried to start getting funnels up and running to, give to people or to show them. And I'm going to be honest with you, I did this for over 6 months and didn't get a single client. Now, I probably could have gone about it a different way and even made it successful, but by about 6-7 months, my wife, who's diabetic, we weren't able to get supplies right away because I left my job, and we ran out of money. I had even cashed out like my 401k. I had 10,000, only got like 6 of it because there was penalties and taxes. So that was gone, within those few months, because that had to pay for supplies and then food and bills and all this other stuff. So, it hurt us financially. And eventually I had to go back to work. And I ended up working at a call center for a different broadband company. And, whenever you start a job at first, it feels good, right? You're kind of in like a honeymoon phase, I guess. And everything felt great. And I was happy and excited. And at first, it was good. I was doing really well, and I was excited for the job. But I worked in a call center, and if you've ever worked in one, it just wears on you very quickly, just taking call after call after call, and mostly about hearing people yell or just complain over and over and over. And it can, be kind of grating, and it can affect your mental health. So while I was in this call center, it started to affect me mentally again, because I was just taking so many calls and a lot of people were just complaining. And that's literally what a lot of people do when they call. And I'm not mad. I'm not complaining about them. That's just the way that it is. And so over time, I was there over a year, and it started to affect me again. With my depression, and also physically, it was just really hard on my body to sit in a chair for 8 to 10 hours. Can't really go anywhere. You go to lunch and breaks, but you're just literally sitting in a chair for hours and hours and hours, and you can't go anywhere. You're tethered because of the phone. So, I just sat there, and, that started to affect me. And I also had gotten kind of in trouble because of my depression and just like getting burnt out on the calls. I started avoiding them, and I'm not using it as an excuse. I did it on purpose, so I fully, admit that I was at fault. But, I avoided calls and got written up. Well, what that means is that when you're on a write-up for 6 months, you can't go to another department. So at the company I was at, you could transfer after a year, but I couldn't transfer after a year because I was on a write-up. So that only kind of played more into my depression. And it got so bad that, like I said, I had been there over a year, going on 2 years, so about a year and a half. I just got to the point where I just wanted to leave, right, again. And I got to that point, and I was super frustrated, and I just started looking for other jobs. And I even put out a few applications, and I knew that in my heart I was kind of going against God, right? I was just kind of making a rash decision again. I was like, man, the first place I get that says yes, I'm out of here. And I didn't want to pray about it because I knew kind of deep down that I was in the wrong for just kind of wanting out. So instead of like sticking it out or having a plan, I wanted to just kind of make that rash decision again. And I felt like Satan was attacking me spiritually. Like he was kind of feeding me these lies like, hey, you're better than this. Just go, just get out of here. And part of me really wanted to. But thank God for my wife, who was like, please don't do this to us again. I need you to work, or at least, have a job lined up so that we can have insurance and a steady income. And so, we actually sat down and prayed about it. So, I had held on to it for a few weeks where I was just so pent up, like I wanted to leave so bad. And I was looking at job offers. I was looking at job offers while I was at work. And, I was just desperate to get out and all this stuff. And I remember praying about it and talking to my wife. And I just felt like, this kind of voice tell me like, look, you're doing it again, and maybe it's a culmination of talking to my wife or God kind of prompting me that I was in the wrong. But I realized, yeah, I was in the wrong again, and I was doing it again. And so I was like, okay, you know what, God, I am in the wrong. I'm going to let this go, and I'm going to give it over to you. And so I stopped trying to force, something else to happen. I was desperately just seeking all these other opportunities, but none of them seemed right or lined up, or they didn't work out or whatever. And I was like, okay, you know what? Fine. I'm in the wrong. I'm going to give it over to you, God. And if you present an opportunity, then I'll take it. But if you don't, then I'll stick it out. And, even if I'm unhappy, I'll do the right thing and stay here from, best interest for my family. Well, right after I kind of gave that up and kind of surrendered that over, where I wasn't trying to force something to happen, my wife and I went on a tour of a coffee company that our church uses. And so, I had the day off. I went on this tour with her. And while I was there, the guy that ran the place, or runs it now, was saying how he was hiring someone. And I was interested. It sounded very cool. It sounded like a great job. And I would be up moving around, and I wouldn't be sitting there clocking a punch or punching a clock like exactly at the minute that I had to be logged in, and only this amount of time for lunch and all this other stuff. It was a smaller company, so it's more relaxed. But I would actually be up and about instead of just tethered at a chair, and that's kind of more what I'm made for. So we went on the tour, and I was interested in the job. And I told him, I was like, hey, I'm interested in this job, but I need to talk to my wife about it first. And so my wife and I set up an interview. And then my wife and I went home, and we talked it over, and we prayed about it. And basically what we came to was like, okay, this will work out if, one, they have, decent insurance, and two, if the pay that they were willing to offer me was between these two numbers. So I won't say what they are, but I had two numbers in mind that if the pay was, either one of those numbers or in between, kind of a range that I would accept, I would take the job. And then if it was a certain amount of, certain days, certain hours, as long as all those things kind of, fell into place, then I would go ahead and take the job. So we talked it over, we planned it out, and then we prayed about it. That if it lined up in those things, that this would be right for us. And then if it wasn't, then I would stay where I was. Even if I wasn't happy, I would stay there for the best interest of my family. So I go for the interview, and then we talked it over, and it ended up that all of the things that we had prayed about lined up. The pay was exactly in the middle of what we were okay with. And they ended up getting a 401k literally a couple weeks after I started there. They didn't have one before that, but they got one then. The insurance is actually better than the place that I was at before. And the job just turned out really good. Now, I've been there about a year. And a while back, a few months ago, before all the, the sickness, went rampant, we started getting really, really busy. And there was a lot of things with my manager and with the work being very, just always going, like being heavy all the time, that it was super stressful at work again. And I've come to recognize that it doesn't matter where you work. I don't think it really matters what job you have. There's always some kind of stresses at that job. There will always be some kind of stress at some point or some level. You might even have the best job in the world, but there's going to be stresses or challenges that you're going to run into. It's just inevitable. And it took me a long time to kind of accept that. Well, recently, before, this whole COVID thing happened, it was starting to get to that point again where it was like kind of boiling over. Things were going on with my manager, other coworkers, how busy it was all the time. And, I was very frustrated. But again, in talking with my wife and kind of praying about it, I realized that I just kind of had to work through it. And, I was just making it about me. That's kind of the key here, is that in all of these times where it was getting stressful, I was making it about myself, right? And I wanted to leave because that was the selfish thing to do. That was the easy out. But the times where I talked it over with my wife and prayed about it, I didn't take that easy way out. I didn't act on that impulse or make that rash decision, and it worked out. Because as soon as I kind of worked through that, prayed about it and just worked through it, just waited it out over time, because everything works out eventually, the job got a little easier. Kind of the COVID thing happened, and, work slowed down. So now we've kind of had some period of rest, and, some things actually changed at work that were stressing us out beforehand, that, was just the same all the time. And it was kind of on top of all that. And some of the people actually left the job. So they, it's not even like the interaction with certain people isn't even there. So it's like a lot of things have just changed kind of in the last few weeks that have improved. And I wouldn't have seen that had I left. And honestly, like, I really like my job now. So it's, even though that there are stresses and all that, very happy to be here. But I wouldn't know that I would still be happy here, at the end of my year mark, if I had left when I was stressed out and frustrated once again. So I guess my overall takeaway from this is that when we make those rash decisions, when we don't plan them out, we're kind of subjective to the consequences. I mean, there's consequences to all of the actions we ever take. But essentially, if you are frustrated with things, you can make changes, but it's best to plan them out. And if you have a spouse, talk them over beforehand. But even the Bible says, that we should plan things out. I think it's Proverbs, and it says, who would build a building without counting the costs or even gathering counsel? That's probably the best way to think of it. And that's kind of the lesson that I learned through all of this, through making rash decisions with my work, is that the time that I did, where I made that rash decision to leave, we suffered the consequences. And it wasn't just me who suffered, my family suffered. So because I just left that job and, didn't plan it out, and I just left without talking that over, without praying about it, not only did I suffer, but my family did for months. But when I actually talked it over with my wife and prayed about it and put it before God, God worked it out. And it's just been, it's been a great thing ever since. And again, it's had issues, but I'm really grateful to be here. So that's kind of the crux of the whole video. And the point that I wanted to make is that, if you're going to make, don't make rash decisions, especially when you're frustrated or stressed. Plan out what you're going to do to kind of get out of that situation before you just kind of go in and make a rash decision and regret it later. So that's really it. Just wanted to share that. See you guys.